Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club. My name is Michael Wager. I'm a partner at Squire, Sanders & Dempsey and adjunct faculty at Case Western Reserve University and the moderator of today's special forum on downtown planning. We are all delighted to be here to carry on the nearly 100-year tradition of bringing important current events to the City Club discussed through civil and civic dialogue. During a class session in March, the students in my Urban Politics and Policy class at Case Western Reserve reviewed and critiqued the Group Plan Commission's charrette report. From that classroom exercise, and then the cooperation and encouragement of Stephanie Ryberg, professor at the Levin College at CSU, and Bob Brown, planning director of the City of Cleveland, this forum was planned and is presented today. We're joined today by members of the Group Plan Commission. Tony Coyne of Mansur, Gavin, Garlack, and Manos, and chair of the City Planning Commission is to my left. To his left is Jennifer Coleman of Jennifer Coleman Creative LLC. She is the chairwoman of the Cleveland Landmarks Commission. And Don Misheff, who is the Northeastern Ohio Managing Director for Ernst & Young. To my right are students from Case Western Reserve and Cleveland State University Levin College. Immediately to my right is Tanisha Tate, graduate student at Case studying social welfare policy. To her right, Kathi Dietzel, senior at CSU, graduating senior at CSU, in urban studies with a concentration in planning. To her right is Michael Heaberlin, also a graduating senior at the Levin College with a concentration in planning and GIS. And finally, Matthew Vogler, senior at Case majoring in political science. Thank you all of you for joining me today on the panel. In 1902, the Ohio governor, George Nash, appointed Chicago architect Daniel Burnham and two other nationally regarded architects as the Group Plan Commission of Cleveland. They were tasked with designing a new civic center for Cleveland. The Group Plan Commission presented the Group Plan of Public Buildings for the City of Cleveland, now commonly called either the Group Plan of 1903 or the Burnham Plan. The legacy of that first Group Plan Commission is Cleveland's Mall, one of the city's most important and most discussed public spaces. Flanked by neoclassical architecture of several of our city's civic and governmental buildings, including the Federal Courthouse, the Cuyahoga County Courthouse, City Hall, Public Auditorium, the Cleveland Public Library main building, and the Cleveland Public Schools Board of Education building, it occupies a central place in our downtown architecture and space. In June 2010, a new Group Plan Commission was appointed by Cleveland Mayor Frank Jackson, charged with creating a unified vision for our public spaces that would connect the myriad projects and existing spaces in downtown Cleveland. In essence, creating a downtown public space network, from the lakefront to the mall, to Public Square, to East 4th Street, to the proposed casino, and to the river, and from the Flats to the Warehouse District, to the Avenue District, and to Playhouse Square. Mayor Jackson asked the Group Plan Commission, chaired by Tony Coyne, to undertake this daunting challenge. It is then no surprise that the frequency of community dialogue regarding downtown Cleveland is increasing. Whether conclaves of architects and planners, neighborhood association meetings, or simply conversations among interested city residents, Clevelanders are talking about the changes that are planned and occurring in their downtown. Edward Glaser, in his recent book, Triumph of the City, says, cities pose fascinating, important, and troubling questions. So, today, let us consider some of those fascinating, important, and troubling questions as they relate to downtown Cleveland. And now I'd like to ask Tony Coyne, chair of the commission, to provide some context and history for the charrette and the group plan's work. Tony?
Thank you very much, Michael. First of all, for a brief commercial announcement, in 1982, I was in college at John Carroll, and I used to watch the City Club forum. This is my second time to actually speak at the City Club. And I sent an application in to join the City Club, and I got a phone call back from Alan Davis, who was then the director, and he took me to lunch at the Hollenden House. And I just wanted to say, since there's so many young people here in the audience, the City Club provides a great opportunity to learn about what's going on in the world. And I really think it's important for all of us to think of the City Club as a tremendous resource for Greater Cleveland. I've had the opportunity to shake Rosa Parks' hand here. I've seen presidential candidates, senatorial candidates, gubernatorial candidates, the left wing and the right wing of our country at the City Club. And I just point out to the students, four on my left and the rest of you in the audience, that this is a great organization, and it's truly an honor for a Clevelander to even be up on this podium with this terrific group. So after that, I'll end the commercial. And I wasn't asked to do that. I did that on my own, just so you know.
Thank you, Tate.
So the Group Plan Commission, when we actually started out about a year ago, we started to meet. And before we did, obviously, myself, the planning director, the mayor's chief of staff, and the mayor got together to discuss why this was so important. We are really embarking upon a significant redevelopment in downtown Cleveland, in several parts of downtown Cleveland. The commission itself was formed in a way to be as collaborative as possible and to seize on an opportunity, which is the restructuring of our entire convention infrastructure. The Medical Mart and the Convention Center will be $500 million of new construction right in the heart of our town. The surface of the mall is our public space. That's Cleveland's front yard. It was envisioned to be the grand entranceway to Cleveland, but due to the development of the terminal tower at the same time as the planning of then a train station and a shipping station or a shipping terminal, it didn't really come into fruition. So when we got together, the goal was to first set up 4 working groups so that we could make this happen. As a frustrated city planner and a longtime member of the Planning Commission, the one thing I'm not going to allow happen, and I think our commission and Don Misheff and Jennifer Coleman could even speak to this, we're not going to just do another plan so that we will have it on the shelf and we'll look back at it 100 years from now and say, hey, wouldn't this have been a cool plan? Wouldn't this have been a nice thing for Cleveland? We've done a lot of those. We're not going to do that this time. So we put 4 working groups together, one for governance to determine how we're going to govern this, not only the process, but an entity that will make sure this goes on for other administrations into the future. Second, we're going to have a good plan with an urban fabric being addressed and the connections to the rest of downtown, both from our lakefront to our public square. And we got a working group together to address that. Dave Abbott chairs it from the Gun Foundation. Third, we put together a finance working group because we got to pay for this. And one of the directions I got from the mayor was it had to be through some type of public-private cooperation. We want private and public dollars at the table. It wasn't just going to be put on the backs of the taxpayers. So that's been an important charge, and that's chaired by Don Misheff, who's done a terrific job looking at the assortment of financing opportunities that are available. And another thing that we thought was important, the 4th working group, maybe it's the most important, especially given what's gone on in our county and in our community for the last few years, is to have a public engagement, public participation working group. And that's chaired by Felton Thomas at the library. He has done a great job at helping us get up a website. We have a YouTube video out. He's helped us with trying to get a group of, I think, younger people, the 2030 generation, about how to communicate this through the internet and through public meetings. Our working groups met several times and have their own committees, probably another 50 or 60 people, but the Group Plan Commission itself met nearly a dozen times. Early in the morning, all of the meetings were public. We always got a quorum, and we have a group of people that I think are dedicated to try to make this project in our central business district. It's really Northeast Ohio Central Business District, important. So we focused on 3 things at the end of the day, and then I'll stop talking. One is the transformation of our mall. That's very important as our front yard. The second is the transformation of Public Square, a very, very important part of our downtown infrastructure that I think has been overlooked. Most people think it could be much improved. That will involve looking at transportation issues and public improvement infrastructure issues. The third is a connection to our lakefront. If we want to embrace sustainability and really address the future of our community, it's about focusing towards our lakefront and our riverfront. That's very, very important. And right now, it's a very difficult walk from our central business district to our lakefront. And I guess there is a fourth. And the fourth is the general connection to all of these districts in downtown Cleveland that are being significantly reinvested. From the Warehouse District, the Playhouse Square, to the Avenue District, to the Cleveland State University area, the Design District, the 4th Street, which has now become really the spine between downtown and Gateway. We have to enhance and we have to bring these great districts together to make Cleveland a 24/7 city and to make sure that in 4 years everybody's going to be looking at Cleveland and what we've done to really transform our community. So that's kind of the goal.
Okay, so let's get into the charrette. We commence with consideration of creating generally a downtown space network. The charrette includes an aerial view of downtown Cleveland defined as the following: an east-west axis from CSU to the Cuyahoga River, and a north-south axis from the lakefront to the southern edge of Tower City development. A couple of questions to get it started. Why is the downtown defined by these boundaries? What were the considerations in drawing this outline of downtown public space? Why is Gateway and its boundaries not specifically included in a defined area? What about the west bank of the flats and beyond? First, we'll start with the commission members, and then hopefully some observations from our youngest panel members.
Let me address that first, and let me say this because maybe I didn't overlook it, but it's certainly a big part of why we're here today. In December of last year, a charrette was convened by the Kent State Cleveland CUDC, Urban Design Center. And Divine Charrette, thank you. I didn't know what a charrette was until I was in grad school more years ago than I want to admit. But a charrette really is a collaboration, and particularly an urban design charrette would be a collaboration, and I'll probably get corrected by some architect in the audience, but where professionals get together who are planners, architects, landscape architects, they look at a plan and they really, in my view, they get together and they discuss what would be a cool thing to do. You know, and they get together and they plan independently. There was a facilitator, Terry Schwartz, who may be here, I don't know, but and she coordinated it, to be very candid. She gets a lot of credit. And approximately 80 professionals, landscape architects, urban planners, designers, and some students got together to discuss what we were trying to accomplish in downtown Cleveland. They focused a lot more on the connections, how to get people from these different districts. So we got together in December with all these volunteers. That was really identified as the central business district, if you will, what came out of some of the work that the Group Plan Commission did. But I think they looked at where were the corridors of downtown that people walk. You know, what can be done with St. Clair, for example? Could it become a smart street with better bicycle access? What streets could you close off? For example, East 3rd Street could be potentially closed off, and it could become a grander entranceway into the mall. So these were all discussed, and then everybody got their different plans together. One of the big ones was how to cross the tracks and get to the lakefront, and everybody had different ideas on that. And believe me, I wish money was no object, because some of them were phenomenal. But so it was a lot of innovation like that. So we got together and we focused on these districts, and I think on the one overhead you'll see how the mall really is uniquely situated right in the center of downtown. And it really is situated in what are independently created districts that make up our downtown. So how do you best connect them? And when we had a design professional from Element Architects, Mark Kinshaw, in town at the charrette, he attended it, that was a big discussion. Cleveland's got a lot of neat stuff independently, but if you weren't from Cleveland, could you really walk from Gateway to the Brown Stadium? Could you get from Cleveland State to the Warehouse District easily? You know, these were the kinds of connections that were discussed and how to make them better.
Don?
And Michael, I don't think we should let a piece of paper limit our thinking. That's something that's out there. And when you started the commission, I think we all kind of came into the room under Tony's guidance saying, what are we doing? I mean, what is this project? We knew it was about changing the mall, and what are they going to do with the mall with all the activity going around? But it exploded immediately into changing Cleveland. And changing Cleveland means changing Cuyahoga County. So you can't separate the two. This is about the county and its major asset, the city. And you know, while there's plans, I don't think our thinking can go beyond, you know, as big as we can get. And that's what started to happen. And you could see everybody in the room and their energy just starting to go up and up and up. And what's kind of fun about my part, okay, we can get pretty big thinking, but how do we pay for it? And it falls back. You can go so far. But the Finance Committee, and Scott Fennerman's here in the room with us. We had Albert Ratner. We had Henry Meyer. we had Paul Clark, all participating in this. You know, there are vehicles out there that we don't know exactly how they're all going to fit yet, but the puzzle's real complicated. Thanks to Deb Janik back there, we have a grid of sources of funds, and you'll see it's private, it's public, it's foundations, but you know, there's a lot of different ways we can attack this. But just because there's a piece of paper out there with some boundaries, you had to start somewhere to kind of put your hands around this. But I feel like there are no boundaries. How big is this? And really the message we all got to get, and especially to the younger people in this room, we are changing the city of Cleveland. And there are so many things happening with private investment in this town right now that no other city in the country has, and we got a chance to capitalize on. And if we let that go, you know, shame on us. But we have something right in front of us with what, $2 billion going on? My God. Name me another city in the United States has this going on right now. You know, be a construction worker here. This is a great place to work right now. So, I mean, you look at the activity. It's there. We just got to try to find a way to capitalize. And it's going to take an effort from all of us. I mean, I'll shut up here. The thing is, if you don't get engaged, shame on you.
So let's hear a little bit about the engagement. Any
That's
comments?
before, I'd like to
Jennifer?
make one more point.
All right, Jennifer.
Our commission's now Baskerville.
The one thing that I'd like to clarify a little bit is even though we had a charrette, and I know a lot of times folks asked about the makeup of the group plan commission, and I think even Steve Litt, who's over in the corner back in the summer, he asked me, why are you the only architect on the committee? And I think we talked a little bit about the point. If this wasn't, the objective was to come up with a pretty picture. The objective was to figure out the plan before we start planning. And so that's why we looked at a lot of the leaders in the community to figure out how we can do this. We needed to have a game plan before we started to draw, because that's a lot of times the problem with a lot of the development that we've had in the city is that we look for the physical endpoint before we really figure out what does the city need and how can we do it. So we have to dream big a little bit before we actually figure out what our plans are going to be and what's going to be best for the city. So in fact, we came up with our 4 groups, but we also worked with some of the projects that were already in play, like the mall, the convention center, and the medical mart development, and also projects that were sort of hopefully closer but not quite on board yet, like the public square. So we had those in play. We worked with the architects and designers that were responsible for that project. And we had a charrette because we wanted to get the local design community involved and invested in this. So even though we had some areas which might not have been looked at, we only had about 4 to 6 hours, so we can only look at a certain amount. But we did look at the connections in some ways that had to do with areas that were not in our nicely colored district.
Right.
And you know what this exposed? What we already have versus what we need.
Right. These are good points. And one thing that Jennifer said is only one architect on the new group plan commission. The first group plan commission had 3 members. They were all architects. One thing neither of them had was anybody that we might characterize as youthful. So I'd like to turn to the right side of mine.
All right, that's it.
And see if we have any comments.
I knew he
Was that sufficiently?
It was only a matter of time.
That's sufficiently provocative. Let's see if we can get some comment on the overall plan, then we'll go into the specifics of it. Just fire away, guys.
I think it's really great that you guys want to connect Cleveland. But the problem is I feel that you guys have left out a lot of, as you said, that you want to dream big and you want to look at what we have and also what we need, but what we need is people in this area. You guys haven't discussed as to how you guys are going to get people into the downtown areas, how they're going to be living there. You guys haven't discussed any housing options, and I know that you guys are looking at maybe doing the east bank of the flats as having housing, but if you guys are going to have this reinvestment into public square and the mall, you need eyes on the streets, because that's the only way it's going to maintain itself and maintain its structure and its safety. That's the only way you guys are going to get people there. I'm also concerned about the corridors that you guys have chosen to focus on. I know that you guys have discussed looking at East 9th as a main corridor, but if you guys have ever walked East 9th and Marginal, that is one of the most dangerous intersections I've ever been on. You have a really nice, the transportation experts made a really nice curved lane, So people that are coming off the freeway can pay attention to cars. They don't see pedestrians. There are close encounters for accidents there all the time. Also, another main issue that you guys didn't look at is as far as Euclid Avenue, as it's a main corridor. We just spent $197 million on that project, maybe a little more. But you guys didn't discuss bringing it in, and I feel that's such a main artery that we just spent money on, but it also connects. Cleveland's not a big city. We're a little bit smaller since we're declining, but we've got millions and millions of dollars being spent in University Circle. You guys have to find a way to connect that to the project, but also I think it's important to connect the west side because we do have the west side market there. We've got Tremont and Ohio City. Those are Cleveland's true neighborhoods. I've been born and raised here. Those are like our hidden treasures. I feel that it's important to connect all of it and not just look at the downtown, but I feel that we really have to get housing down there.
Matt?
Speaking generally, I have a couple thoughts about the entire project. First, I'd like to give it a couple compliments. I think that the project does a good job of providing a significant amount of visual connectivity because there is some physical connectivity. I could physically walk from Public Square through the mall to Brown Stadium, but it's not necessarily the easiest thing to do. But I think that this proposal does a lot of good work on making it visually apparent of where you're going and where the primary arteries are through the city. But now, moving beyond that, I feel that this project underutilizes the assets that we have in this city. Cleveland was a city founded on a lake and a river, and a lot of the prosperity experienced in this city originally was founded on the fact that we had this large shipping center, we had these waterways, and this project does not address any of the water assets that we have. And I feel that it could. I mean, you look at what we have here. We have proposed projects like the casino, which is right on the river. We have proposed projects like the east bank of the Flats, also right on the river. And then the new lakefront proposal by the Brown Stadium. I feel like a water taxi or some sort of utilization of those assets could really help this plan. And in addition to that, I feel that there's a lot of proposals for new development, but I don't see as much utilization of existing stock of buildings in Cleveland. I see a lot of vacancy signs. I see a lot of empty space when I walk around downtown, but I feel like a lot of those buildings are beautiful buildings. I mean, I go to other cities the same size as Cleveland, and I don't see the same, quality of architecture. And it's really a beautiful city, and I feel that it's a shame that some of these buildings that really are wonderful buildings are being underutilized. And I feel that instead of slapping up new, steel and glass structures, we could work with a lot of the brick and mortar that's already on the ground. And I feel that while it is, thank you, while it is forward thinking to look at what we could build, I feel that it also shouldn't be at the expense of what we already have, which is, in my opinion, quite nice.
Okay, let's get into some of the specifics of the charrette. There is a couple of slides that speak to bridging the gap between the mall and the lake. It has a few challenges: a highway, railroad, enormous expense. The charrette provides 2 slides and shows some of the existing conditions and elevation issues, and then shows some spectacular design proposals to bridge the gap, including many from the lakefront station jury of the 2009 Cleveland Design Competition. Why is this element an important component of the charrette?
Well, the connection to the lakefront, and if I could respond to Ms. Dietzel's comments, so I have to put my group plan commission hat over here and my city planning commission hat on here. We have, the city planning commission has done a great job rezoning certain parts of the city. The Avenue District now is an overlay district from Euclid Avenue all the way down to the lakefront is adaptable to residential. So in some respects, the group plan commission had a more finite task than, let's say, what the city planning commission does. So I mean, that's an important thing to keep in mind because you can't do everything when you're given certain parameters. As it relates to the connection to lakefront, that's critical, absolutely critical. And your comment about, and maybe it was your comment, to get to the lakefront along 9th Street there is really treacherous. Frankly, from 9th Street and on West 3rd, it truly is dangerous. You're crossing at almost a highway interchange. So that's why that pedestrian connection is absolutely one of the most important things, probably top 3 that we recommend be undertaken. The graphic you see up there from the 2009 competition that the architects, AIA, I think, put that on, with the Lincoln Land Institute, I believe. That's important but we need to get champions of that. That integrates what's called the intermodal system with the train station being improved and potentially a significant parking structure, which would be the substructure for a bridge to cross over the railroad tracks and what is a freeway, maybe someday to be more of a boulevard. That's important because it gets us to our lakefront, but that's a very expensive piece of infrastructure. So we still have that as the prize in some respects, but that doesn't mean we can't do a much better, safe and attractive and hopefully aesthetically iconic pedestrian bridge that'll get us over to the Science Center and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
And another thing I'd like to point out is, to your point about getting people downtown. Right now, depending on who you talk to, we've got between 10,000 and 12,000 people who live downtown. For the area that we're talking about, which is to the lake, to the river, and what is the other side?
Like the river.
The river and the highway.
Right.
For that acreage, we need somewhere between 20 and 25,000 people to be a developed neighborhood. And it's time that we start looking at downtown as a neighborhood. You cited Ohio City and Tremont, which is true. You think of those, you perceive those areas as neighborhoods, as full-fledged places where we live. Cleveland has, at least in my lifetime, gone through a sea change in looking at the downtown from the 60s of being highly retail businesses, the captains of industry were all located downtown. But things are changing now. This is the first time in our history as a city where we, well, at least since we were a farm, basically, where downtown is going to be a primary place to live. And it's incumbent upon us and important as the mid-sized cities, the idea of a mid-sized city changes, for the downtown to be vital. So we're not building projects are not going to bring people downtown. Other people are going to bring people downtown. So we do need to start building up. And I think looking at our public spaces is almost job number one, because those are the spaces that are going to bring the vibrancy. That's where you're going to go down and walk your dog or look for somewhere to eat or just have a good time on a Saturday at 4 o'clock. So the one thing that we're looking at in the mall, primarily the big spaces, which are the mall and public square, are how do we make those livable? Now, we're not saying that business takes a second seat, but we have to look at the logic of making the city logical, something that we can intuitively get around, so we don't have to walk down streets and then have to cross because there's some kind of obstacle on the next block. We have to look at making that connectivity something that will make our city lovable and livable, not just for the people, our natives, but for tourists and anyone who comes into town. You look at Chicago. You can get Chicago in 2 hours, if that. You understand how it works, where you're going to go. We need to have that in Cleveland, which has so many assets that you talked about. So many, much more than a lot of the other cities that are out there. We're heads and shoulders in terms of our physical environment. But we have to look at it holistically to figure out how all the pieces go together.
And Michael, I just quickly, like Tony said, some of the stuff you're describing was beyond the scope of the project. But I'd go to the buildings, without getting into a lot of details, there's probably 3 new hotels converting old buildings here in town right now, maybe 5. The Higbee building is being converted to the casino. So it's not all new going on. On the new side, and I can speak specifically because I was the decision maker on the East Bank of the Flats for Ernst & Young down there, I needed a place that we could call live, work, and play. And the entire project ends up phase 2 is virtually the village then, because that's when new apartments and new condominiums, that we couldn't get it all in one space here in town to put an office tower, though, with 20, 30 floors also. So the combination of the two, there is some revitalization. I agree with you. There's gorgeous buildings around this town, but go look on the corner East and 9th right here. That's being converted to a new hotel. A lot of people don't even realize that right now. Another one between here and Playhouse Square for the theater district. Another one at Crown Plaza getting redone. So there is some of that activity. It hasn't got as much publicity as some of these things at this point.
Use moderator's prerogative. Anything on the connectivity mall to Lake Erie?
I have a comment with connectivity to the mall. I think there's an issue with our slides. They're not changing. I don't know if the audience can see the bridge plan. But you talked about connecting Public Square to the mall. I mean, it is a great public space, but I don't feel like was put into as a destination. There's no reason to go to the mall. and I've seen a lot of plans that talked about redoing the landscape and maybe elevating the hill. I mean, I would be opposed to that. I think it's a great historic landscape. It's great how it is, but there needs to be some reason to go there. Maybe a temporary, like a cart where someone on their lunch break could go down and rent bocce balls or just some chairs to read a newspaper. I feel like that was overlooked.
That's a nice setup, Michael. Let's to try and keep it moving because we do have a bunch to cover and we want to leave time for questions. So let's talk about the design and connection options for the mall. The mall, notwithstanding its storied history, is 3 separate and separated city blocks recognized by many, including Michael Heaberlin, as an underutilized asset. The charrette includes a list of proposed changes and enhancements. So here's a couple questions to get us started, and we can focus now on the mall. Is there sufficient focus on future uses? How should we integrate those uses with the MedMart and the Convention Center? And are there good models from other cities? Union Square in New York, the Green Park in London. Do we have something to look to and say, there's something we could emulate?
Well, yeah, I think absolutely. And one of the things I feel like I'd rather go with a point-counterpoint because their questions are all so good, to be honest. The fact that we need to have, programming down at the mall, that's critical. Doing a nice park is one thing. Unless you program it, it may not be successful. It's really important. It's got to become more of a focal point. One of the things I hope will happen because of the design of the Medical Mart and Convention Center, the main entranceway to the Medical Mart will be across from the Marriott Hotel, focusing toward the mall. And that was a big deal for the Planning Commission that it opened up out onto the mall. And also the direct connection to the Convention Center itself will now be at Lakeside, and that will be right across from Mall C. That will be an elevated area, but the roof will be green. So those are 2 things that will clearly bring people on a fairly regular basis to the mall. But what we have to look at in programming is critical. We're working with Parkworks very closely on that. We expect to have plans. There's event planners in other cities that have actually taken over certain major parks. I'd like to see the Cleveland Orchestra come down there a couple times a year, not once. I'd like to see the food cart, which thank goodness we finally adopted that food cart legislation.
Yes.
My goodness. When you see how that will create an opportunity on the mall, because there really isn't a destination place to eat, and some of these food carts now can be really kind of aesthetically interesting to look at, that will create another reason to go to the mall. So you've got to create reasons to go there. You just can't have open space and not program it, not activate it, and so that's going to be very important.
And the Finance Committee was very adamant about the mall development has to be self-sustainable businesses. We don't want to be coming back to this community every 5-10 years saying, oh, we need to do a fundraiser to rebuild the mall. And that's like where Tony said the orchestra, Playhouse, joint ventures with them to hold events down there. Also, businesses that will stand on their own around the mall. So that's very much a focus of the financial side of this. I mean, you sit in a room with Albert Ratner once, you get that lesson real clear about self-sustainable businesses. Don't be supported by the community and the taxpayer all day.
Tanisha.
One of the things that you mentioned is that people are going to bring people to the mall. And so there's a rich culture and diversity that's here within the neighborhoods that's not really being celebrated and promoted in the mall area. And one of the comments that you made is that you want to have self-sufficient and sustainable businesses there and promote those local vendors. Have it set up like the Pearl Street in Portland, Oregon, where you could come down to the city and that you know that you're going to be able to buy certain arts and you know that you're going to be able to, on a certain day of the week, see a certain artist and experience different things, because when you think of cities, you want to have a certain experience when you go there. And as tourists and visitors, they can actually take a part of Cleveland away with them when they leave the city. And it's a double win for visitors as well as the people who live here, so they can see that they could really identify with the downtown area, and they can start promoting it and say, hey, let's go downtown, there's something to do here. Because when you think of Cleveland, it's like the first question that you get when people say, oh, you live in Cleveland, they say, so what is there to do there now that our big star is gone? And so we could be able to say,
Who's that?
I don't know who that was. So we could be able to say, on a certain day of the week, we could go to the mall because you know that it's going to be something that's there that's going to sustain your interest, and we can promote local businesses in that way.
And safety is critical. You touched on it. We have to clean up the streets. There's no doubt about it. Now, that's beyond the commission's role, but that's critical.
I mean, one thing that was interesting is when I was your age, in my 20s, some time ago, and a young architect, and I was dating my husband-to-be, and we had no money, And at that point, we used to go down to the mall to the rib cook-off, which used to be on the mall in the 80s.
Right.
And, you know, we'd have like $5 between us, and a bone cost $1, so, you know, we could kind of have a nice little day. And, you know, it wasn't about going, obviously we couldn't afford it, they didn't have the fancy restaurants downtown, but we had a good time. And we you know, we're at the point where we kind of need to have that, which is a place you can go whether you don't always have to buy. This isn't a lifestyle center that we're trying to build here. We're trying to build a wonderful public space. So there was talk, and we're hoping to have outdoor rooms where you might have you know, anywhere from a 20 to 20 by 40 space that anyone could have public art. It could be a spot where someone comes down and gives a lecture. We could have tours of the downtown area, any number of sort of civically oriented things. A couple years ago, I was in Chicago and I went to Millennium Park, and we've been talking all about Millennium Park, but the best time I had there was just on a Saturday morning going to a yoga class that some, you know, yoga group got together, and they just had this beautiful transformative space, you know, on a Saturday morning. And we didn't buy anything that particular day, but it was just wonderful to commune with other people outside in a lovely space. And what we need to make sure, especially with governance, is that if I did have something I wanted to do, whether it was give a speech or do a Zumba boot camp or something, I would know how to arrange that through the city or through the Downtown Cleveland Alliance, so that it's something that whether you live downtown or you just want to be part of it, you know that process. And other cities like Portland are really focusing in on making their public space usable for all the citizens. So that's part of governance that we're looking at.
I also think, though, that it's important not just to speak about the mall, but to speak about public square in conjunction with the mall.
Right.
Because
Right.
I think that they go hand in hand.
Right.
And to neglect one without the other is foolish. I think that one of the things to consider is how can we make that entire space useful, and not just individually, not just how is public square useful and how is the mall useful, but how can we put them together as one cohesive entity. And I don't necessarily know the answer to that question.
This has been an age-old problem, because when the mall was developed, which we talked about, the train station was at the head, the northernmost part of the mall. And that would actually be the one thing to bring people into the mall, because the buildings or civic buildings are not really buildings that encourage. You don't have living or hotels on the mall, at least back in the day, to have people come into the space. So when that project went to Tower City, that created this tension that we've never been able to resolve with the mall as the civic core versus public square. Right. So one of the things that we looked at is what that connection would be. How do we reconcile both of these spaces again, so we understand one is one, one is the other. This is how they work together, not how they work apart, but this is how they work together. So especially in the charrette, there were a lot of great ideas about how, whether we link them, what goes where. And, you know, right now it's a little difficult because the mall is a project that is happening. It's a big hole out there now. Public Square is a project that we're trying to get going. So we've had parking studies. There was a lot of discussion. Not only we had, I think there were a couple of forums at CSU about the traffic, the mall. And that's almost as long as there's been a mall, which is as long as there was Moses Cleveland, as is the mall. I mean, is Public Square a transportation hub, or is it a community-based people's space?
Yeah.
I mean, as far as Public Square is concerned, I feel it's both. I feel that it's a mistake to cut, because I know that they're looking at transportation studies to quit having buses or cars in Public Square, and I feel that is such a mistake, because I think it's going to create a tourist bubble. I think it's going to cut people from the city to connect with the city. I don't think it's fair for us to cut us from, once again, the going to University Circle or going to CSU or even going to the West Side. I think that it's great you guys want to get rid of cars, but by doing so, then you're going to increase the tourism by, you can take the RTA from the airport to Public Square. And I feel that I feel like almost a farmer's market should go in Public Square, because I feel it's a place where people can exchange goods and, once again, you know, thoughts, and it's a great activity hub. But I feel that you need the people there, once again, to keep it safe, but just to have activity.
Right. Just so you know, we're not getting rid of cars in Public Square. The only significant transportation change will be potentially the closure of Ontario, and that's subject to a traffic study. But the cars will continue to go around the square. Buses will continue to go through the square. We've got to be very sensitive to our transportation system working efficiently, especially given the comment made about our improvements to the health line, which is the Euclid corridor. So,
and immediately the city and county are coming together to fund this transportation study to do it right. It's just not being blindly, but it's not all cut off.
Okay. Also, have you guys looked into doing, I think I'm pronouncing this right, it's a ciclovia, and what it is, it's a Spanish word for a bike path. What they do is they close off the, like, you can close off the street for maybe a weekend or for a week, and can't you guys just see if people will actually use the spaces and maybe monitor their own walking habits?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting you mentioned that. Yeah, we thought about, especially if we close, let's assume we implement this, hopefully, we close off Ontario, you will have Superior going through the square. If you could close that off for a farmer's market on a Saturday and just use the perimeter, that might be a neat opportunity to create a special event space. So that's something that I think we're going to look at doing.
And there was the whole connectivity discussion regarding the national parks, the bike trails, and Parkworks. Ann Zoller's here. It was a very instrumental part of the commission. No, that health-conscious mentality, especially with our brand from the clinic and UH and those type of, no, that's a big part of this.
Unfortunately, Matt, if I can interrupt for a moment. Unfortunately, noontime forums are only an hour, and we want to create some opportunity for Q&A today. So I need to take the mid-forum break, as it's called. Today at the City Club, we're listening to a special forum featuring the Cleveland Group Plan Commission and students from Case Western Reserve University and the Levin College of Urban Affairs at Cleveland State University. We will return momentarily for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We encourage you to formulate questions for speakers now and remind you that questions should be brief and to the point. We welcome all of you here, especially those who are our guests. We hope you will join the City Club and become active in the ongoing civic dialogue here. Wednesday, May 4th, the City Club is excited to host a dynamic conversation about entrepreneurial movement in Cleveland in partnership with Launch House. Tim Mueller will kick off the event where guests will meet and interact with 10 of the most exciting young entrepreneurs who are building new startups in the field of technology, alternative energy, medical devices, education, food, and other industries. We're also pleased to welcome our guests who hosted tables today, the Friends of Joe Simperman, Medical Mutual of Ohio, Squire Sanders and Dempsey. Thank you for your support. Now I'd like to return to our panel for our traditional Q&A. We'll welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding the microphone today is City Club Program Director Carrie Miller and Marketing Manager Heather Sikora. Now our first question, please.
Hi, my name is Gloria Ferris, and my question has to do with trees and large stature trees, not little frou-frou 20-year-old trees. And also the pedestrian issues. There was a lot of talk about making it safer. What was seen as how to calm the traffic that is not wanting downtown as a destination, but they want to get home, get out, get in, and go to wherever they're going? How did the commission, or how are you going to merge the two so that it makes it a pedestrian friendly? Because I heard a lot of that, but I think that's the key. Pedestrian friendly and cool.
Well, Gloria, I thought you'd for sure want to talk about the entertainment zoning and patio legislation we've been looking at, but I appreciate the question. You know, I think the pedestrian side of this is one of the most challenging things we've had to look at. Cleveland is a real auto-oriented town, and getting people out of their cars and the public transportation is tricky. And also, trying to have it so that the pedestrian experience is better. One of the things, and I use the example of St. Clair because I thought it was well done in terms of how it was discussed at the charrette as well. If you think of where Ernst & Young is going in the flats and all the way out to the Avenue District at 12th Street, if that street had more trees, and I mean nice trees, and it had taller trees, you've got utility issues to look at, but I agree. And then even some street furniture, you could sit down. In addition, parts of Cleveland with bicycle lanes, we might put a stripe along the road for a bicycle lane. And you might have a little, it looks like a stamp of a bicyclist every 500 feet or something. That just isn't good enough. And the plans that we've looked at, what we'd like to see downtown, maybe you paint that area green so it's bright. You know it's a bicycle lane or it's for somebody else other than a car. And the cars know that too. Because when you think about the concept of healthy streets and sharing the street, that's about public safety. You know, in Copenhagen, 30% of the people that work in their downtown ride their bike to work. And I know we're not that kind of community, but the younger folks that ride their bikes to work downtown and how people get around and also recreate, it's something that we've got to do a much, much better job at. And quite frankly, the Health Line, for example, on weekends, to ride your bike from Public Square to University Circle, and this speaks volumes to the folks who live in Tremont and Ohio City, it's a pretty easy ride. Not much traffic, you got a lot of room, so we have to do a better job at that.
Any comments here?
Have you guys ever thought about, because I like to ride my bike and sometimes I don't feel so safe, but the problem is have you guys thought about maybe either right-sizing the streets? Because, I mean, the streets were originally made for 1 million people. We don't have 1 million people. So maybe we can either look at making the streets smaller and possibly extending the sidewalk, because what they do over in Europe is they have a sidewalk which is elevated and they have a bike lane on there and they have a different color, and that makes me feel a little bit safer because when I'm riding on my bike there I feel elevated and I have my own light system. And I feel like, I mean, people who usually ride their bikes also drive cars, so we're adjusted to that light system, whereas cars, they just see lights.
The candid answer, we haven't gotten that far yet at all. And we're probably behind the curve on that.
Yeah, actually, different projects, like Cleveland State University just came in front of, I believe, the downtown design review district with a plan that was for bikes. It had a much more aggressive than what we've seen bike path through actually Chester and Euclid. And I think that would be fantastic for that project because that could actually show what can be done. So hopefully this is not going to be sort of an overall, you're going to see a change in the city. I wish we were Europe, where they just go in and sort of plow everything down and do it the way that they think it should be done. But in our case, in Cleveland, in the United States, it's going to be big projects. And frankly, Cleveland State University is leading the way on a lot of urban planning initiatives. They've transformed the whole college in the last 5 years, which is one of the major projects that this city has done and most transformative. So I hope that we do see some of the sort of additional than auto, but pedestrian and other alternative vehicular traffic notions. If we see it in place, then other projects will soon follow through.
Next question.
My question for the panel is, what impact or what type of involvement has RTA had with this particular plan? Because when we start talking about connectivity, I mean, it's very difficult to talk about that without talking about public transportation. Yeah. And to the young lady's point, I was actually in Europe, and it was interesting because I was in Amsterdam. And to be quite honest with you, one of the things that I enjoyed about the city was that they didn't have a lot of connectivity issues. And one of the things that I enjoyed was that they kind of had this organized chaos where the Rijksmuseum is totally far away from Central Station or the red light district, but it was just kind of made in a grid that made everything so easily to assess. So I guess one question I had was, what impact does RTA have in this particular plan? And then also this question is for Don, in terms of private investment. When I was in the Netherlands, Cleveland wasn't an international city. And my question is, when you all are looking for those private dollars, like what has been the response from the countries or companies that are based in Copenhagen, Amsterdam, Eastern Europe, throughout the world in order to help finance this project?
Who wants to go first? I could do the RTA component first, and maybe Don can answer the second question. I'm dying to hear the answer about who from Copenhagen and Amsterdam is going to invest in Cleveland. No, we've actually met with RTA not long ago, and RTA, Joe Calabrese actually attended most of the meetings, as did I think Mike Schipper came to several with RTA. Our biggest issue in terms of addressing RTA, they do a great job with the downtown circulator. Obviously, the Health Line's been successful. We're going to have to be sensitive to how public transportation circumvents the interior and the perimeter of Public Square. So we really need to be careful about that because we want to make sure that it's as friendly to the customer as possible. In other words, where people get on and off the bus is important to those folks. And in addition, you've got to make sure that you don't have traffic conflicts. So we've got to work with them on we're going to try to get a traffic study done, and then obviously any changes we'd make, we'd have to do in collaboration with RTA.
And frankly, if you look at some of the top, probably in the top 3 issues that vibrant cities, whatever their size, one of the biggest one is to have a robust public transportation system.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something we have to work with, I think, globally. It's not just RTA's problem, but it's how do we as a city deal, number one, with the density issue of being close to people. And I think in some ways, you know, RTA and taking the bus is not something that people think well of, to be perfectly frank. And we've got to get over that as Clevelanders.
Don, do you want to speak briefly to the other question?
Yeah. You know, have we gone to market yet? No. But have we started a study on naming rights and branding rights of all these facilities? First, we had to determine what assets were being built and created with this connectivity before we can go out and monetize it. But that is in process. There's a meeting this afternoon with the group working on the naming rights, which is a collaboration from a firm here in Cleveland, Cleveland State and Arizona State, which has a bunch of experience in it. I'd say to you, though, there's going to be companies. I mean, I think we lose touch with it, and I hear some of the younger discussion. Northeast Ohio, so I'll go regional, is still the 7th largest corporate headquarters in the United States today. And I don't think we act like it. We still are. And there are numerous companies doing business with these companies based in Cleveland. And in this medical device industry, from Copenhagen, yeah, we will be contacting them. Do they want to name something here to keep that brand? Or is it the bike path? Does somebody want to name? We're going to try to monetize everything we can with the private sector. The other thing, these companies, these corporate, pay a lot of taxes, so they're already doing a lot of funding of this too. There are other sources of this. But it's out there, and it will be global thought. We just have to go to market. If we went to market, this is a key factor for us with this, trying to finance it through the private piece. If we went to market that we're doing the malls, we're going to go nowhere. If we go to market that we're changing Cleveland and Cuyahoga County, we have something now. And that was a big factor in our thought.
The next question.
Good afternoon. With water being the source of all life, and with Cleveland trying to market itself as the green city on the Blue Lake, I'd like the panel to address a pedestrian bridge in light of the fact that the highway restructuring is going on inward, from the lake inward, And I'd like the younger members of the panel and the wiser members of the panel as well to talk about that.
First purpose. You want to talk about the bridge, Tony?
Yeah, I'll talk about the bridge, but you guys go for it. I want to hear from you.
Here we go.
Starting someplace as an architect would, looking at the total picture, but could it be started initially and then build upon?
Well, actually, one interesting thing is that there's a lot of great plans for 3 beautiful pedestrian bridges in Cleveland. One that literally connects the mall with our North Coast Harbor is not in the plans, but that was actually one of our main recommendations to add another bridge. There's one at Wendy Park that's being presented. There's one actually at North Coast Harbor from one point to the other point. But we'd love to see, number one, because of what we said, East 9th Street and West 3rd are very vehicular, and it's going to take sort of a lot to make those different. But to have a bridge, a direct connection from the mall that would land, hopefully in between the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the Great Lakes Science Center, I think it could be a beautiful thing. So, whether or not we actually at some point talked about 2 bridges, but I think we realize that we do need to have it's almost an emotional connection between one part of our public space and our beautiful lakefront. So we want to see that. We need some money.
Yeah. I also feel like you mentioned Green City on a blue lake, and I think that goes back to one of my original points about utilizing our water assets. I mean, you spoke about a bridge from the harbor area or the North Coast area up into the city. Well, why not have connections through the water? And this sort of goes back to the previous discussion about what the RTA's role is, and I think that could play a huge role in creating something like a water taxi or some sort of mode of transportation other than a bus, which has previously been stated is not a popular mode of transportation. So I feel like we need to look not just at the streets and the sidewalks, but we need to look at other ways that we can move people around the city. And I feel like if you have the bridge and you have the water connectivity and you have all those things, then you're giving people multiple options. You're making the city truly circular, and then there's no one part of the city that you would feel is necessarily distinct from another. And that utilization of the water assets could be expanded beyond just downtown. And it could be utilized to connect to other parts of the city that happen to be on the lake. It could be used to connect internationally to Canada across the lake. I mean, we have a great opportunity with the lake right here to utilize that to connect us not just within Cleveland, but to connect Cleveland beyond. I mean, we heard just in the beginning that we shouldn't limit ourselves in what we think about with this project. We shouldn't think just inside the box of downtown, and we shouldn't think just inside the box of Cleveland. We should look beyond our shores and look as far as we can. And I think that utilization of our existing infrastructure assets as well as utilization of potential water assets or other means of transportation is the key way to do that. And it adds an element of uniqueness to the city that I think would be very well received.
Do we have time for one more question? One more question.
Thank you all for a very interesting panel. Parts of downtown have been defined by some very interesting decisions made with regard to parking, and by interesting I mean bad. Just look at west of Public Square.
Right.
The $500 million that's going into the ground for the MedMart and the convention facility actually subtracts parking without including an apparent component for parking.
Right.
I wonder if you've considered that and if you have any idea what the plan is for parking in relation to those two facilities.
Well, I can answer that one of two ways. One, I think the private sector is going to look at that because there are parking organizations really looking at structured parking in and around the convention facility. You know, I was kind of glad that we didn't get into that. I'd like to see less surface parking in our downtown. I think it's one of the biggest problems we've got in terms of us taking for granted our vacant land in downtown. Our parking rates are generally very low compared to other cities. And I think that I'd like to see the private sector address that. I don't want to see the public sector have to spend too much money on parking infrastructure. Structured parking is very, very expensive. As it relates to how we're going to eliminate some of that surface parking, particularly adjacent to Public Square, you do this kind of stuff. You transform how Public Square looks. I can assure you that the group that owns the parking lot on Public Square will look very seriously to redeveloping it. I can almost guarantee you that. And you could go to other cities for those examples. This isn't Tony Coyne talking. This is Chicago's Millennium Park, the experience of the real estate development around it, Bryant Park in New York, the Highline Park in New York as well, even what's going on in St. Louis. And I just got back from St. Louis. It has a major effect. Parks that are done right have a major effect on the real estate values in concentric circles or rings around them. So you'll see that change, and Cleveland's got to get over us having this desire for really convenient parking at all costs. We really got to get over that.
And Tony, I'd add to that.
Michael, one second. You know, on your use of the waterway, I don't know how familiar you are with the East Bank Flats project, but there's a 20-foot boardwalk, there's volleyball courts along the waterway, and now there's boating where you can park a boat coming in off the lake and start using it. I guarantee you, once you build that, somebody's going to say, wow, I could put a water taxi in here and make some money. And start going that back through the casino and that. First, you got to make it accessible. And that's what that's in phase one of the East Bank of the Flats. What worries me is when phase two, which is already starting to accelerate, puts the residential, some of that may have to be taken down. Because you're going to have green space. But it's already in the plans for that piece at least.
I'm sorry to report that we're out of time. Today at the City Club, we've been listening to a panel discussion featuring members of the Cleveland Group Plan Commission and students from Case Western Reserve University and the Levin College of Urban Affairs at Cleveland State. I want to thank the panelists, both for their wisdom and their youthful exuberance, and thank each of you, ladies and gentlemen. The program is now adjourned.